Hi, I'm Lanny, and this is Preserving Today. You can preserve cranberries in raw honey for a year or more without refrigeration with this fermented honey cranberry recipe. Honey fermented cranberries are super simple, and you can do them just like any other honey ferment. So check out my video on how I ferment honey garlic, and I have a video on how to do honey fermented lemon ginger. It's as good as it sounds. There's only a few ingredients you need for any of these ferments. For the cranberries, what I do, fresh cranberries, raw unpasteurized honey, fresh ginger root, small portion of a cinnamon stick, and some juice of a fresh orange. If you're feeling fancy and you have a little extra time, using the orange zest is also a great idea. The process of making honey fermented cranberries is super simple. All I do is put cranberries in a jar, cover them with honey, and let them sit at room temperature. So before I put my cranberries in the jar, I'm gonna sort them, and anything that looks wrinkly or mushy goes in the garbage. You want nice, fresh, plump, firm cranberries for this recipe. And the other thing I'm gonna do is to kind of move the fermentation process along, poke a hole in each cranberry. You can do that with a toothpick or a skewer or a fork, whatever it takes. Just poke a hole. This is going to let the juices start to seep out of that really thick skin that would otherwise take quite a while for it to burst before it leaks out to the honey. With that, I'm going to also slice some ginger, and I don't even peel mine. I just get fresh organic ginger root. I rinse it off, and then I slice it really thin. And then I cut an orange in half and juiced it, and I put about, I squeezed the juice into the jar. I didn't measure it. It's probably like 2 tablespoons for this. And I'm using a quart-sized jar, but I'm only gonna fill it about halfway with cranberries and ginger. And how much ginger to use, I don't know how much. If you like it spicy, if you like ginger a lot, use more. If you don't like ginger as much, don't use any, or just use a little bit. But I like it because it gives like this kind of warm flavor. I probably used a 2-inch piece of ginger root and sliced it. Once I sliced it, it filled the palm of my hand. I threw it in there with a couple tablespoons of juice and about a half of a cinnamon stick. I find those warm spices like cinnamon stick and clove can get out of hand really easy, so I only use a half stick. After all that's in there, then I pour my raw unpasteurized honey over the top. Pouring the raw honey can be challenging depending on what state your honey is currently in. If it's crystallized, you can try warming it up in a double broiler on a really, really low heat. You have to be super gentle because you don't actually want to cook the honey. You want it to be able to pour, but you don't want it to be warm or even especially not hot. There is beneficial enzymes, yeast, and bacteria present in that raw honey that's going to help this fermentation process and also gives tremendous benefits to the person eating them after. Pouring the honey over the cranberries is definitely my favorite part. It is the prettiest part and the most fun to watch. The thick honey trying to get through all the nooks and crannies that the cranberries leave is enjoyable. The bubbles that it makes on the surface as it pours through is really beautiful. And there's many things in the fermentation realm that I call nature's lava lamp. This might be the best example of that. This is so fun and mesmerizing to watch. After the honey is poured over your cranberries, you want to make sure it covers them, but don't worry, you're going to start to see the cranberries float. Don't chase that line with more honey. Just put enough honey to cover the cranberries, and then if they start to float, it's no problem. Now you might know from vegetable fermentation that the goal is to actually keep your food below a liquid line, that you want to keep your vegetables below a brine. This is going to be a little different for a honey ferment. We're going to handle taking care of that surface in a different way. Now the reason you keep your food below the brine in a vegetable ferment is to prevent mold from growing on the vegetables on the surface. We want to do the same thing here. But since we don't want to use a weight to submerge this under the honey, it would just be really messy and wasteful. Instead, we're using the method of flipping the jar over, which is why I've been sitting here holding an upside down jar this whole time. So after your honey ferment is mixed, place a piece of parchment paper over the opening of the jar and then screw on your lid and band. Screw it on tight and flip your jar over so that all the honey runs through the cranberries in the other direction. The cranberries float to the bottom of the jar, right? Still to the top, but the bottom of the jar, physical jar. So to care for this ferment as it progresses, all you're gonna do is check on this jar about every 12 hours. Once in the morning, once before bed is fine. Once a day, once at 24 hours, open the lid and actually let some gases out. And then tighten the lid carefully and flip the jar over. So you want the jar to spend about 12 hours on its head like this, and another 12 hours flipped over. And that way, you're never gonna have the same cranberries floating on the surface being exposed to oxygen. They're gonna take turns being rotated under the honey so that they can all ferment. Now on day 0, when you first pour it, you're gonna see the honey looking like honey. It's very thick. Even the next day, you're gonna start to notice on day 1 that the honey is starting to thin out. By day 3, as you can see here, there's some bubbles on the surface and the honey is much more liquidy and thinner. And here we are on day 4, and I'm gonna flip my jar over. You see those air bubbles coming up through it and everything is moving around. It's so beautiful to watch. Everything looks really, really good. After this settles a little bit, I'm gonna open the lid and just let the air out again. Do this same thing for at least a week or until you see the bubbles subside, and then you don't have to be as careful. You don't have to flip it every day, and you can just leave the lid on a little looser so that if there are any more gases, they're not gonna build up. Right here, this top feels a little tight. And I can hear it. And it's starting to smell good. It still smells the strongest of honey right now, but soon it'll start to smell more spicy and you'll smell that cranberry smell. It takes time for these cranberries to lose all their liquid into the honey. It's still very firm. So you can start tasting this honey whenever you want to, but I think that it is best to wait until the honey starts to look even more red than this does. And the cranberries are starting to look a little bit shriveled and shrink in size, and the honey's even more liquidy. This is going to be the time when you really know that the cranberries have fermented, and you want that. And you don't get a lot of opportunity to eat raw cranberries. Even cranberry juices are usually cooked to get them to release that juice. So this is a great way to get the good antioxidants and vitamins from raw cranberries, the benefits and enzymes from raw honey, and then of course, you know, warming benefits from the ginger and the cinnamon. The way I serve these cranberries varies quite a bit. They're pretty versatile. You can drizzle this honey with a few berries onto yogurt. You can do the same with some warm brie cheese and dip some crackers or bread in there. Put the honey fermented cranberries on ice cream or just eat them with a spoon. Use the honey any way you would normally use honey, even adding it to your tea. Last year I made a whole half-gallon jar of these and I overdid it a little bit, which is a good mistake to have made because it's an experiment. So here, a full year later, I still have some honey fermented cranberries left, and let's see what's in the jar. Okay, so you can see that it's really liquidy. You can see that the cranberry solids are mostly floating on the bottom of the jar now. This really smells good, but it has like a slight alcohol type smell, but it still is fermented honey cranberries. Wow. It's almost like a cranberry honey liqueur, but it doesn't really have a warming feeling like there's a lot of alcohol. I wouldn't just drink this straight, but adding a few tablespoons to this to something else I wouldn't even worry about giving to kids. So if you're wondering how to preserve cranberries without refrigeration, this is a wonderful option. This is so good. Thanks for watching. I'm Lanny, and this is Preserving Today.